The cold that morning did not simply bite, it crushed, seeped into bones, stole breath, and wrapped the city streets in a cruel silence broken only by the sound of traffic rushing past people who had long stopped seeing those standing at the roadside, and among them stood Aisha, her thin shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders, her fingers numb as she clutched a basket of wilting flowers while her twin children pressed against her legs for warmth, their small hands trembling as icy wind cut through their worn sweaters. And though she smiled at passers-by and softly offered roses with a voice already hoarse from hours of pleading, her heart was heavy with fear because she had sold only 3 flowers since sunrise, and the landlord's threat echoed in her mind, reminding her that today was the last day, before they would be thrown onto the streets. And as she shifted her weight to ease the ache in her feet, memories she tried desperately to bury crept back, memories of warmth, of laughter, of a time when she had not been invisible, when she had not stood begging for mercy from strangers who looked straight through her as if she and her children were nothing more than part of the pavement. The twins, Zayn and Zara, were only 6, their faces pale, but eyes still holding an innocence she fought every day to protect. And when Zara tugged her sleeve and whispered that her hands hurt from the cold, Aisha knelt down despite the pain in her knees, rubbing her daughter's fingers and telling her softly that everything would be okay, even though she herself was no longer sure that was true. Because just 2 years ago, she had been a teacher, proud, independent, married to a man she loved deeply, until sickness stole him away slowly and mercilessly, draining their savings, leaving behind hospital bills, unpaid rent, and a grief so heavy it almost crushed her spirit. And when she lost her job soon after for missing too many days caring for him, the world did not offer sympathy. It offered eviction notices and closed doors. And now here she stood in the freezing cold, selling flowers because it was the only way she could earn money without leaving her children alone. And as the sun climbed higher but offered no warmth, a sleek black luxury car rolled slowly toward the traffic light near where she stood, its windows tinted, its polished surface reflecting a world she no longer belonged to. And Aisha barely glanced at it because she had learned not to hope, not to imagine kindness where it rarely appeared. Yet something made her step forward anyway when the car stopped, raising her basket slightly and offering a flower with a practiced smile, her breath fogging the air as she whispered, "Flowers, sir!" And inside the car sat Daniel Royce, a billionaire known to the world as a ruthless businessman. But in that moment he was not thinking about markets or mergers. He was staring at the woman outside his window, noticing the way she shielded her children from the wind, the way her hands shook, not just from cold but exhaustion. And something inside him tightened, painfully, because it reminded him of a past he rarely allowed himself to remember, a childhood marked by hunger, a mother who worked herself to collapse, and nights spent praying for miracles that never came. And as the traffic light stayed red, Daniel rolled down his window despite his driver's hesitation, asking her how much for the flowers. And Aisha named a price so small it almost embarrassed her. And when Daniel handed her a bill far larger than what she asked and told her to keep the change, she froze, staring at the money as if it might vanish, her lips trembling as she tried to thank him. But before she could step away, Daniel noticed the twins shivering violently, their noses red, their shoes soaked, and without thinking he asked why they weren't in school. And Aisha's voice broke as she explained that schools were closed for winter break and she couldn't afford childcare. And something in her honesty struck him harder than any prepared speech ever could, because she wasn't asking for pity, she was simply surviving. And when the light turned green, Daniel should have driven away like everyone else, but instead he told his driver to pull over, shocking Aisha and drawing curious glances from strangers. And as he stepped out into the cold wearing a coat worth more than everything she owned, he knelt down in front of the twins, asking their names and offering them a gentle smile. And for the first time that day, Zara smiled back. And in that moment, Aisha felt a strange sensation, hope, fragile and terrifying, stirring in her chest, because she didn't know yet that this single stop would change not only her life but the fate of her children forever. And as Daniel stood back up and looked at her with an intensity that made her nervous, he asked a question no one had asked her in a long time. "How can I help you?" And the wind howled around them as if the city itself was holding its breath, unaware that this frozen roadside was about to become the starting point of a story that would touch millions of hearts. And if you feel your chest tightening right now, if this moment has already pulled you in, then remember this. Stories like this remind us why kindness still matters. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity in ways you never expected. The cold no longer seemed to matter once Daniel asked that question, because Aisha's mind froze instead, her thoughts colliding in confusion and disbelief as she stared at a man who looked like he belonged to another universe entirely. And for a moment she almost laughed at the absurdity of it, because people like him didn't stop to help people like her. They didn't kneel in the dirt to speak to shivering children. They didn't look at a poor woman selling flowers as if she mattered. And yet here he was, waiting patiently for her answer while cars honked behind them and curious faces turned to watch. And Aisha wanted to be strong, wanted to say she didn't need anything, because pride was the last thing she still owned. But then Zayn coughed, a deep, worrying sound that echoed the nights he cried from fever when she couldn't afford medicine, and her strength cracked, her voice trembling as she admitted that she just needed warmth for her children, a safe place for the night, and maybe, if she dared to say it, hope that tomorrow wouldn't be worse than today. And Daniel listened without interrupting, without glancing at his watch or his phone, and when she finished, he nodded slowly as if making a decision that would change the course of many lives, telling her softly that no child should be standing in the cold like this. And with that, he instructed his driver to bring the car closer, opening the door and insisting they get inside to warm up. And Aisha hesitated, fear flashing through her because trust had burned her before. But the twins climbed in eagerly, their small bodies instinctively drawn to the heat, and seeing them relax for the first time in hours pushed her past her doubts. And as she stepped into the car, the warmth hit her like a wave, tears spilling down her cheeks despite her efforts to hide them. And Daniel handed the children hot chocolate from a nearby cafe without hesitation, watching as their hands wrapped around the cups like precious treasures. And in that moment, something long buried inside him broke open, because he remembered being that child once, cold, hungry, invisible, praying for someone, anyone, to notice. And he silently promised himself he would not drive away. This time, like others had driven away from him, and instead of dropping them off somewhere temporary, he asked for her address, learning that address now meant a single rented room, with no heating and an eviction notice taped to the door. And Daniel's jaw tightened as he gave his driver new instructions, taking them not to a shelter, but to a warm hotel where the staff rushed to help without questions. And when Aisha realized this was real, that her children would sleep in clean beds with blankets and hot food, she collapsed onto a chair, sobbing uncontrollably as months of fear poured out of her. And Daniel didn't rush her, didn't offer empty words, just placed a reassuring hand on the table and told her that this was only the beginning. Because over dinner, he learned her story fully, the teaching career, the husband she lost, the way life seemed to punish her for surviving, and instead of seeing weakness, he saw resilience, intelligence, and a strength forged by suffering. And by the time the children fell asleep mid-meal, he had already made up his mind, offering not charity but opportunity, arranging medical checkups, enrolling the twins in a private school, and helping Aisha return to teaching through a foundation he quietly funded for widowed and displaced women. And when she protested, overwhelmed and terrified that this kindness would disappear like a dream, he looked her straight in the eyes and told her that help was not something she had to earn through pain. And those words changed her more deeply than the money ever could. because for the first time since her husband died, she allowed herself to believe that life could still be kind. And weeks turned into months as Aisha rebuilt herself piece by piece. Standing in front of classrooms again, smiling with confidence she thought she had lost forever, watching her children thrive, laugh and dream without fear, while Daniel watched from a distance, never seeking credit, never telling the world what he had done, until one winter evening, a year later, when fate brought them together again at a charity event where Aisha was invited to speak. And as she stood on stage telling her story, not naming him, but honoring the stranger who stopped his car, Daniel sat among the audience with tears in his eyes, realizing that this single decision had given his wealth a meaning it had never had before. And when she finished, the room erupted in applause, not for riches or power, but for humanity. And Aisha ended with a message that silenced the crowd, reminding them that sometimes all it takes to change a life is stopping when everyone else drives past. And if you're watching this right now, feeling that lump in your throat, remember this story whenever you have the chance to be kind. And subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are not just entertainment. They are reminders that compassion can rewrite destinies, and the next story might just change the way you see the world forever.